Hi everybody, welcome to this tutorial. So the purpose of this tutorial is, it's a little bit of an add-on really, is to show you how to make those planets that we're using for the other compositions. So you don't have to do this one because obviously you've got some ready-made planets there in the composition I've already given you that you can play around with. But if you want to know how to make these planets, then this one is just showing you how to do that. So this is the scene that we were using earlier. So I've added some sort of atmospheric synth sounds as well to it. But yeah, basically what we're going to be doing in this tutorial is making some planets. Okay, so here's our new composition. So 1920 by 1080, standard HD footage and black background color, 30 frames per second, all good. Okay, so here's our comp. Right? And what we're going to do first of all is we're going to add a layer to this, a new solid. But if yours won't already say this, what you need to do, yours might say 1920 by 1080, so I'll show you what that would look like. 1920 by 1080, okay? And you can type in a new amount, but the best thing to do first of all is just to lock the aspect ratio first and then type in 4000, and that's going to make it roughly, it's not exactly 4K, but it's going to make it roughly 4K size solid, okay? And I'm going to make this black like so. And I'm going to click OK. So here's our black solid. Okay. Now what we're going to do, if we zoom out, you'll see the size. That's the size of our solid compared to our composition. Okay. So this is our 1920 by 1080 composition. This is our 4K solid. And the reason why we're using 4K is to give us loads of lovely detail that we're going to use later on in our planet textures. Okay. So the first thing to do is to right click on our black solid. And we're going to pre-compose it into a different composition, okay? Because this comp one, this is what we're going to be doing all of our, like the next bit, the tutorial you're doing where you're playing around with the planets and the camera and everything. That's the composition where you're doing that. And we want all of our planets to work in separate compositions so that we can change them without changing the overall scene itself, okay? So I'm going to call this sun base, and I'm going to click OK. So here's our sun base. So we're still in comp 1 at the moment. So this is our composition, okay, where we're going to be playing around with the cameras and creating our space scene. And this is our composition. If you remember pre-comps, what it does is it creates a small composition nested inside the main one. Okay, so I'm going to double click on that one. That's very important. Otherwise, you're going to start working in the wrong composition. So double click on that. And here's that black solid that we created earlier. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over to my effects and presets. So you might need to click on the chevrons to find your effects and presets, okay? And you're going to type in fractal, and we're going to use Fractal Noise. I'm going to drag that onto my solid, okay? And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to go Command D and duplicate that because we're going to be using 3 separate textures, all right? So I'm going to solo this first one so I can see it. Okay, and what that's done is it's hidden the other 2, so we can just see this first one, right? And I'm going to start off with this basic texture here, okay? And that's loads of lovely detail there, so if we zoom in, this is a nice 4K, okay? And what we're going to do is I'm going to go into, this is my fractal noise effect over here. So click on the solid that we want to use. This is our fractal noise effect. And I'm probably going to stick with basic actually in this one. I'm going to go into my subsettings. You get used to fractal noise. Subsettings is a good place to start when creating anything. So you're going to go for your sub rotation. It's going to create quite a nice sort of texture particle effect. Now, with things like sub influence, for example, I could dial this up and create a real sort of rocky kind of texture if I wanted to. I can scale it up, so that's the scale of the actual texture itself, not the, you can scale up the texture by clicking on transform and changing the scale like that. What that does is that's the or scale it right down like that. That's the subscale where it's actually like, that's how the scale is affecting the actual map itself. Okay, so that's not looking too bad. I think I'm gonna probably leave it like that. That'll do. And I'm going to go to my contrast. I'm going to up the contrast to make some nice black splodges in there, and I'm going to take the brightness down a bit. So that's a nice sort of basic texture. So the next one I'm going to open up. Okay, so I ought to say at this point, I mean, whenever you're working in After Effects, you know, you get lots of knowledge over the years from lots of different places, and it's quite sort of it's not often that you know exactly where something's come from, but I ought to do a shout out to videocopilot.net with this tutorial, because some of their ideas, I've done my own spin on some of their ideas, but some of the stuff I'm going to be doing is stuff I've got from videocopilot.net and then put my own kind of spin on. And you should definitely check out videocopilot.net for other After Effects tutorials, because they're just superb. If you really want to push your After Effects stuff forward, then that's the way to do it. Okay, so here's our second solid, all right? And this time I'm going to go into dynamic progressive. Okay, whoops. That's highlighted the wrong one there. So that's easily done when you're doing this. So I'm going to go back to basic for that one. So that's my, there we go, that's it. So now I'm going to solo this one, highlight that, and I'm going to go into my dynamic progressive, like so. So that's a slightly more kind of bulbous look. I'm going to go into my subsettings, and then go into my sub rotation, and I'm going to get to these nice sort of tendrily kind of looks. Okay, I'm going to influence that up a little bit, and then scale that up so it's a bigger kind of effect. And then I'm going to go into my transform, and I'm going to scale that up. So it's, there we go, that's looking pretty good. I'm going to up the contrast again, and I'm going to drop the brightness down. Yeah, I like the look of that. Okay, so I'm going to turn that solo off, and now what I'm going to do is turn that one off just quickly, and I'm going to toggle my modes and set that to screen. So now I can see both textures at once, okay? And then finally, with this last one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to highlight the last one, and I'm going to go to dynamic twist, I think, with this one. And again, subsettings, I'm going to wind those subsettings around. I get something a bit like that. And I'm going to scale that up again like that. Maybe not quite that much, actually. There we go. Add a bit more of that. And then again, add that contrast, and then drop the brightness right down so it's just these kind of clumpy textures. And I might go into my transform and scale that up again. There we go, that's kind of looking pretty cool. So if I now set that to screen as well, so you can kind of see the texture that we're creating now. So what we can do now is we've got this dial here, this evolution dial, and for each of our textures, this basically just says how much do you want this texture to change and evolve as the scene progresses. So I'm going to set the stopwatch on each of my solids here, like so. So that black solid is my base sort of solid, so that's that sort of just rough texture. So I'm going to make that evolve. So that's the beginning of my clip, and I'm going to take that to the end. I'm going to make that evolve a bit. Now this middle one, so that one's there, my stopwatch is on. I'm going to drag this back to the end. I think what I'm going to do is make this one evolve a lot. So that's going to go like that. Okay, so you can see what's happening is as I then move this through, it's then changing. And then finally this black solid here, I'm going to take that, I'm going to make that evolve that. Okay, so that's our that's our texture. Nice. So now what we're going to do, the final thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to go into layer and new and adjustment layer. Okay, you can go and apply different adjustments to each of these layers in turn if you want to, but just for quickness, I'm going to apply an adjustment layer here, and I'm going to go to effect and color correction and curves, and I'm going to just push this a bit more because I want to separate it out a bit more. That'll do. And I'm going to go to red and push the red up. So this is obviously adjusting all of the layers with the same adjustment layer effect. I'm going to go into blue and dial that blue down a bit to create that sort of bright orangey kind of look. And then with green, I'm going to do some nice sort of contrasty kind of texture. There we go. That's kind of looking interesting. Let's go back to the blue, dial that back a bit, quite that much. I don't know, actually, I'm kind of happy with it as it is. Yeah, that'll do. Okay, so that's our texture then, okay? And as you move your playhead through, you can see this texture is evolving and changing, okay? Now, what we're going to do is we're going to come back to comp 1, and there's our texture right there, okay? So you can see it. It's still in its 4K format. Now what we're going to do is we're going to come over to our effects and presets, get rid of fractal, and we're going to type sphere. Okay, we're going to take this CC sphere effect and just drag it onto our layer. And lo and behold, we have now got ourselves a sphere. Okay. In fact, actually, before we do that, let's take that effect off again. Let's try scaling that down to the same size as our comp now. There we go, that's better. Sorry, that's more like it. Now we're going to take that CC sphere, and now we've got our sphere effect. Okay. Now, if you scale that up, look what happens. You just sort of lose some of that detail, which isn't really what we want. So actually what you're going to do is go into sun base and go into radius and scale that radius back up. And then that should leave you now with lots of lovely texture. Although it's still not looking quite as sharp as it ought to. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to where I was before, scale that back up, try putting the sphere on C, because it's one of those things that I think that's probably better actually. That's a better effect, isn't it? There we go. All right, so yeah, leave that as it is. Okay, my bad. I know how annoying it is when you're doing tutorials and then somebody goes, yeah, you know what I just told you to do? Don't do that. But anyway, one of those things. Right, so here's our sort of basic planet. Okay, so as you can see, with this sphere effect, we also get this lovely shading, and you can kind of play around with that, with the sort of light and the shading and what have you. You know, so you can kind of get your light height, and you can move that around and kind of position it as you want it, whatever, to kind of create these kind of lovely three-dimensional effects. Okay, and we'll talk about this with the auto orient towards camera in the other tutorial. You know, because obviously that's a thing that you're going to need to be thinking about when you're actually creating your final scene. But for now, we're going to get rid of all these lighting effects, because actually this is a sun and it doesn't have shading. Okay, but if this was just a normal kind of bleached planet kind of look, then obviously that's what you might do. Okay, in fact, before I do that, I'm going to where are we? Before we do that, actually, I'm just going to show you another technique, just so that you can get that shading before we remove it. Okay. The other thing then, just to note about this effect, is that it all looks fine until you rotate around, and then you see there we've got a nice sharp line where the two edges of the texture have met each other, which obviously we want to avoid. And you also, if you look at the top, you also get these polar issues as well, where it's sort of gone all squeezed at the top as it's created this sort of reverse equirectangular, if you like. So we can do stuff with that, but we're not going to today. All we need to do is just kind of think, right, let's just make sure we're aware of those, and we're just going to make sure that those aren't visible to us. Okay, so that's fine. So there's our planet. All right, and what we're going to do now is I'm going to go to layer and new solid. Okay, and I'm going to put this solid over the top like so, and I'm going to call this, right click, rename that, and I'm going to call it surround texture, because we're going to use this for different things. Okay, and then I'm going to come back over here, go to my fractal noise again, putting my fractal noise in. This time I'm going to go with dynamic progressive. I'm going to open up my subsettings and whack that round to create these sorts of tendril effects. I'm going to bring the scaling up, and I'm going to bring the scale up so it's nice and big, perhaps not quite that big. There we go, that's kind of looking good. Contrast like that. There we go, that's looking quite nice. Okay, what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to use this to create different textures around my planet. Okay, so the first one I'm going to do is, if I go to my ellipse tool, I'm making sure I've got my surround texture, hold down shift and then create a circle like so. Okay, and what I'm also going to do is I'm going to come onto this and hold down shift again and create a second circle. Okay, so about like that sort of thing. Okay, and I'm going to click on mask 2, and just using my arrow keys, I'm just going to line that up with the middle of my original circle. So you can do all sorts with this. I mean, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to create like a ring. So with this second mask here in my surround texture, I'm going to go to subtract. So now we've got this sort of circle here. If I go into my mask properties, I can feather the edge out here, feather the edge out there, And now I've got myself a nice sort of smooth mask. So if I click away, there's my sort of texture. Okay. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn that into a 3D object and also my planet into a 3D object. So if I now go into two views over here that we've done before, and I'm going to move that to the side like so. Okay. And down a bit. And I'm going to scale this whole thing up because it doesn't quite fit yet. There we go. So I'm going to move that to the side again like so, and down like that. And then all I'm going to do is I'm just going to click on the X rotation and just rotate it like so. Bring it up, and so I've got myself a planet with rings. If you don't like the look of that, what you could do is, if we undo that rotation, I'm going to apply a go to my blur and sharpen, and go for a radial blur, or a radial fast blur even. Let's try that one. Okay, and so oh no, that's not what we want. Sorry, radial blur. Radial blur. There we go. Okay, so we can set the center of our blur in the center of our circle, like so, and then we just click blur amount, and that's going to blur like so. And now if we rotate that down, so that's just a different type of effect again, isn't it, that we can use to create ourselves a sort of ringed planet type effect, or you can create, you know, all sorts of different kind of effects for that ring, if you like, make it bigger, whatever you want. Okay, but what we're going to do with this, because this is a sun, this is why I kept the shading so you can see what it looked like as a planet. Okay, it's a bit hokey, I mean, you'd have to fettle it a bit, you know, but what we're going to do is, instead of that, we're going to come back to our texture, and we're going to get rid of that circle in the middle as well. So I'm just going to undo it. I mean, you can do that by undoing it, or you can just click on the mask too and just undo the mask. Okay. And what I might do actually is I might, I don't know, I'll leave it as it is for now for the purposes of this tutorial. All right, I'm going to turn off the 3D again because we don't need the 3D at the moment. Okay. And what I'm going to do is get my surround texture. I'm going to pick it up and move it over the top of my planet and then move it behind. So this is my sun texture. Okay. And then I'm going to scale that back so it's kind of just peeking around the edge. Okay, and again I can click position and I can use my arrow keys to create the position that I want. I might have scaled it down a bit too much. There we go, that'll do. Okay, so far so good, but at the moment what's happening is this doesn't look quite right for a couple of reasons. First of all, the shading, so let's deal with that now, and then we'll look at this background. So let's go on to sun base. Okay, and our CC sphere effect. Here's our light. So what we're going to do, light intensity and shading, I'm going to take my diffusion down to 0, okay, and I'm going to bring my ambient light up to whatever I want. Okay, so that's quite bright, so that's looking good. So that's got rid of that sort of three-dimensional shading, so it's now just a sort of nice sphere. Okay, and the other thing I'm going to do is I might just scale that up a bit more. Okay, maybe not quite that much. Yeah, just click on position, just get it as I want it. There we go. I've got all this sort of glow here, this sort of grey textures. Okay, now I can change that because I can go into surround and I can up my contrast again, can't I? Like so, which is fine. But it's still not quite right because it's still got all this sort of extra bit. So what I'm also going to do is I'm going to right click on it. No, sorry, not right click. Effect and channel, and then I'm going to go into Solid Composite, and what this does is it kind of blends it with another solid to kind of get rid of that transparency and give it kind of solidity. So what I need to do now is go into Solid Composite Effect, go to white, set that to black, and now that's nice and solid. It doesn't have any transparent elements in it. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create some more glow kind of effects behind our sun. So I'm going to go to Layer and New Solid. Okay, I'm going to go to a white solid like so, and what I'm going to do again is I'm going to click on my ellipse tool, okay, and holding down shift I'm going to create a circle which is sort of about the same, like bigger than my sun, but you know, I can put it behind it. So I can pick that up, move it around behind my sun. Okay, that'll kind of do, won't it? You can just adjust it by eye. Right, and I'm going to take my white solid and I'm going to right click on it and rename that glow 1. Okay, and I'm going to open that up and transform that to scale it down. And so as you scale it down, you can see the position isn't quite right. So I'm going to just move that again by highlighting position using my arrow keys and scale it down a little bit more. Get that just about peeking around behind. 89, that'll do. Right. What I'm going to do with this one is I'm going to come up to my effect and I'm going to go to blur and sharpen and I'm going to go to fast box blur and I'm going to go to blur radius and just blur it out just a little bit, so maybe sort of 7 pixels. If I zoom in slightly, what's that looking like? It's not looking too bad. So now I'm going to go to Command D to duplicate that. Okay, and this time I'm going to bring my blur radius up to a lot more. Okay, but I'm also going to, for glow 2, I'm going to go to my opacity and just drop that back down again. Okay, and then finally, what I'm also going to do is I'm going to go to glow 1 again and duplicate that to create glow 3, and I'm going to bring that in front of my sun. Okay, so now what we might need to do is be a bit more specific about this. So I'm going to scale this back down to the same size as the sun, hopefully. So position that so it's kind of matches. And we've got to get this right because this is going to be an internal blur effect. So scale, we're going to say 86. Let's turn off my box blurs, we don't need that. So that's, I don't know, let's say scale 87, is that right? We'll see, we'll see. Okay, what we're going to do now then, so here's our white solid on the top of our sun. Okay, and what we're going to do now, so this is our glow 3, this is the one that's in front of the sun. Okay, and we've got a mask here because that's the circle that we made. So we're going to take that mask, open it up, mask 1, and we're going to go to edit and duplicate. And what we're going to do with this one is we're now going to select our second mask and set that to subtract. So now we can't see it. Okay, just going to click on transform position and just move that around so it's sort of a bit more. There we go. And now what we're going to do is we're just going to come into mask 2 and we're going to feather the edges, and you can see what's happening is it's sort of creating this blur, this blurred white effect. It's effectively like an inverted mask doing it this way. Okay, so I can kind of add more and more and more until it sort of blurs around the edge of the sun. Okay, so there we go. So that's our kind of sun effect, if you like. Okay, so I might be tempted to just duplicate glow 3 again now, and yeah, so that's blending in a bit more around the edge now. Okay, and with glow 4 I might go into my masks, mask 2, and feather that back down a bit so that it's now a bit less. There we go, so it's a bit stronger around the actual edge of the sun. So there we go, so there's our sort of our final sun kind of texture. Okay, I'm going to go into my surround texture and I'm just going to up the contrast a bit more and darken that off a bit more because I just want those kind of leaping edges. Nice one. And then finally what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to layer and new and adjustment layer, and I'm going to do the same as I did before. Okay, so I'm going to add an effect, color correction curves, and I'm going to bring up that brightness a bit, darken that off a bit like that. And then I'm going to go into red, push the red up like we did before, green, push that green up like that, add a bit of green based contrast. That will do, it's looking pretty good. Yeah, and then I might go into my blue and just bring that down just slightly. Yeah, that's not looking too bad. Maybe a bit less than that. There we go, that'll do. Okay, so that's our final kind of sun look then, and as we move through we can see it's evolving and what have you. In fact, the one thing we didn't do is our surround texture. We never added evolution to that, so I'm just going to click on the stopwatch for that one, take it through to the end, and then wind the evolution around to make sure that it's sort of nice and nice and flaming around the edge of our sun, like so. There we go. Now all we have to do is, because this is in comp 1, here's our original pre-composition, here's all our extra bits. I'm just going to highlight everything, and I'm going to right click, and I'm going to pre-compose, and then I'm going to click, I'm going to type sun final, and now I'm going to click OK. And here is our final planet. Okay, so if you open up the sun final composition, you've got the original pre-composition, which is the texture here. Okay, so that's the sun base composition. Then in sun final, this is that texture now added to another composition with all the other bits we've just added. And then finally in comp 1, all you see now is sun final. So if I now turn that into a 3D object, that's now a three-dimensional object for all of those bits. And if I want to change the sun, all I need to do is go into my sun final, and I can change those bits. If I want to change the texture, I can go into sun base and just change that texture. And that means that I can make significant changes to my planets without doing any kind of harm to my final composition. Okay, so I hope you've enjoyed that tutorial. I hope you have a bit of fun creating your own planet effects, and I look forward to seeing what you come up with. Nice one.